Good afternoon, members of the press, other guests and colleagues. We're about to start the PIOJ's quarterly press briefing, and I'm just going to ask you for your brief attention. At this time, do check that your cameras and your mics are off. The briefing will be live streamed on the PIOJ YouTube channel, which is at the PIOJ, and therefore available after the meeting is finished. After the presentations, comments and questions will be accommodated from the floor. You are invited to put your comments or your questions in the YouTube and Zoom chats, as those platforms will be monitored. Questions will be taken there. If you do wish to speak on mic, indicate by using the raised hand feature. Thank you. The briefing will now be opened by Senior Director, Corporate Marketing and Communication, Mrs. Marcia Blake Hall.
Thank you, Gwyneth. Ladies and gentlemen of the media and those joining us virtually, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us at the PIOJ's quarterly press briefing, where we will provide preliminary estimates on the performance of the economy for the January to March 2024 period. Unfortunately, the Director General, Dr. Wayne Henry, is not available to join us for today's presentation. But Mr. James Stewart, Senior Director, Economic Planning and Research Division, will do the presentation. He is joined by Mrs. Rochelle White, Senior Technical Advisor to the Director General, and Mr. Hugh Morris, Director, Modeling and Research. Mr. Stewart, you may go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Baker. Before I provide the details on economic performance, let me remind you of the purpose of these quarterly economic estimates provided by the PIOJ. The PIOJ presents preliminary estimates on economic performance for each quarter. This is based on early information available from major data providers. The release of the preliminary estimate is consistent with trends in all modern economies globally, where it is commonplace to release a first, second, and even a third preliminary estimate before the final official figures are released. The PIOJ releases the preliminary growth estimate approximately 6 weeks following the end of the quarter being reviewed. Note, however, that the targeted timeline for press briefings is sometimes impacted by challenges in the data collection process. Statin releases the official GDP figures at the end of the third month following the end of the quarter being reviewed. The release of the preliminary outturn information is used by various stakeholders, including our international development partners, the private sector, as well as the government, to inform critical planning and policy-related decisions. Today, we're reporting that real gross domestic product for the Jamaican economy grew by an estimated 1.9% in the January to March 2024 quarter, compared with the corresponding quarter of 2023. This represents 12 consecutive quarters of growth. The performance for the January to March 2024 quarter largely reflected the impact of: one, increased external demand, which was facilitated by continued growth in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners, and was reflected in the positive performances for the transport, hotels and restaurants, and other services industries. Two, higher levels of business and consumer confidence. Three, increased agricultural output facilitated by an increase in yield per hectare, as well as total hectares reaped. And four, the continued expansion in capacity utilization at alumina refineries, which resulted in higher alumina production. Further growth in the economy was tempered by a contraction in the construction industry. Real sector developments: the goods producing industry grew by an estimated 3% compared with the corresponding quarter of 2023. This outturn was driven by improved performances in 3 of the 4 industries. Agriculture. Output of the agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry was estimated to have increased by 7.7%. The industry's performance reflected the impact of favorable weather conditions facilitated by higher levels of production relative to the corresponding quarter of 2023, when the industry was negatively impacted by drought conditions. The performance during the quarter was due to greater productivity, as reflected in a 4.7% expansion in output per hectare. Additionally, there was a 5.9% increase in the hectares of domestic crops reaped relative to the corresponding quarter of 2023. Output for all parishes increased, with the exception of Westmoreland and St. Catherine. The group other agricultural crops was estimated to have grown by 10.5%, reflecting increased production in all 9 crop groups. The most significant increases were recorded for cereals up 69.8%, potatoes up 22.4%, plantains up 18.5%, condiments up 17%, other tubers up 11.5%, and vegetables up 10.4%. Traditional export crops grew by an estimated 17.1%, mainly reflecting higher output of bananas, up 26%. Animal farming was estimated to have grown by 2.2%, reflecting higher production of poultry meat, up 2.3%, and eggs, up 6.5%. Mining and quarrying. Real value added for the mining and quarrying industry was estimated to have grown by 24.8% due to increased output of alumina and crude bauxite. Alumina production was 27.8% higher due to increased demand. This was facilitated by a rise in the alumina capacity utilization rate by 9.4 percentage points to 43.1% compared with the corresponding quarter of 2023. Crude bauxite production increased by 4.6% due to an expansion in the bauxite capacity utilization rate, which increased by 1.5 percentage points to 33.9%. Manufacturing. Real value added for the manufacturing industry grew by 2% due to estimated growth in both the food, beverages, and tobacco and other manufacturing sub-industries. Higher output was recorded for the food processing component, largely due to bakery products up 8%, dairy products up 1.9%, and poultry meat up 2.3%. Further expansion of the food, beverages, and tobacco sub-industry was tempered by lower production of sugar, down 15.1%, and beer, down 16.7%. In the other manufacturing category, a rise in output stemmed from an increase in the production of non-metallic minerals, reflecting cement up 29.1% and clinker up 67.9%. Construction. Real value added for construction fell by 4.5%, reflecting a downturn in the building construction component, which outweighed an estimated growth in the other construction component. The performance of the building construction component was constrained by a 56.5% contraction in housing starts by the NHD. Preliminary sales data revealed a 10.9% decline in the real sales of construction inputs. In particular, retail sales of hardware, paint, and glass declined by 12%. The estimated growth in the other construction component was due to increased capital expenditure on civil engineering activities by the National Road Operating and Construction Company, NROC, up 609.2% to 5.1 billion, due largely to expenditure on the Montego Bay Perimeter Road. And the Jamaica Public Service Company, up 38.7% to 1.6 billion, due to construction and installation activities related to the transmission and distribution of electricity. We now take a look at the services industry. The services industry was estimated to have grown by 1.6%, reflecting growth in all industries with the exception of the producers of government services. The improved performance largely resulted from industries associated with travel and tourism, as well as a general increase in demand for electricity associated with an expansion in economic activities. Electricity and water supply. The electricity and water supply industry was estimated to have recorded growth of 6.7% in real value added, due to increases in electricity and water consumption. Electricity consumption increased by 8.2%, reflecting increased consumption for 5 of the 6 categories, namely residential up 7.5%, general service, that is small businesses using less than 25 kilovolt ampere kVA, up 8.8%, power service, that is large businesses using more than 25 kVA, but less than 500 kVA, up 3.7%, large power, that is businesses using more than 500 kVA, up 9%, and largest power, which are single locations that have a minimum peak demand of 2,000 kVA, up 19.1%. These were sufficient to outweigh a decline recorded for street lighting and traffic signals, down 0.6%. Water consumption grew by 0.6% due to higher consumption in both the Western Division, up 1.3%, and the Eastern Division, up 0.2%. Transport, storage, and communication. Real value added for the transport, storage, and communication industry grew by 1.4% due to an estimated increase in both the transport and storage and communication components. The improved performance in the transport and storage component reflected the effect of 1, growth in air transport, largely reflecting increased passenger movements up 5.7% due to arrivals up 6.3% and departures up 5.8%. This was supported by the continuing strengthening of the travel and tourism sectors. And 2, an expansion in maritime transport due to an 18.4% increase in total cargo handled at the seaports. This reflected a 46.2% growth in transshipment cargo, which outweighed an 8.8% contraction in domestic cargo. Wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery, RR trim industry. Real value added for the RR trim industry was estimated to have increased by 0.9%. The performance was influenced by increased demand associated with 1, growth in the related manufacturing and agriculture, forestry, and fishing industries, and 2, increase in both consumer confidence index up 8.5% and the business confidence index up 2%. Based on preliminary data for the quarter, there was an estimated 1.9% increase in total real gross sales. Higher sales were recorded for 4 of the 8 categories, including motor vehicles, auto repairs, and accessories, up 16.1%, agriculture, food, beverages, and tobacco, up 9.3%. Retail sale of pharmaceuticals, medical goods, and cosmetics, up 4.9%. And textiles, clothing, shoes, and jewelry, up 0.5%. Finance and insurance services, real value added for the finance and insurance services industry was estimated to have grown by 1.5%. This performance was influenced by increased profitability at deposit-taking institutions associated with the higher level of economic activities and an increase in net interest income and fees and commission. Hotels and restaurants, real value added for the hotels and restaurants industry increased by 6.3%. The industry continues to benefit from increased travel due to growth recorded in the main source markets and effective marketing strategies. Preliminary data for the quarter revealed that total stopover arrivals increased by 7.4% to 788,246 visitors. Cruise passenger arrivals increased by 18.1% to 563,828 visitors, and total visitor expenditure increased by 9.3% to US $1.28 billion. GDP performance for fiscal year 23-24. For fiscal year 2023-24, real GDP is estimated to have grown by 2%. The outturn for the fiscal year was supported by improved performances in all industries, except for agriculture, construction, and producers of government services. Growth largely stemmed from 1, mining and quarrying, which grew by an estimated 60.9%, due mainly to increased capacity utilization. 2, hotels and restaurants, up 7.6%, reflecting the increase in demand for Jamaica's tourism services. And 3, electricity and water supply, up 6.2%, due to increased electricity demand associated with the general expansion in economic activities. Short-term economic outlook for the April to June 24 quarter and the entire fiscal year 2024-2025. For April to June 2024, growth prospects for the economy are generally positive. It is projected that the economy will grow within the range of 1.5% to 2.5% relative to April to June 2023. This is based on the continuation of the growth momentum in most industries. Specifically, growth during the period is expected to be driven by 1, continued strengthening of the mining and quarrying industry due to higher capacity utilization at alumina refineries. Increased domestic demand due to relatively high levels of employment. And 3, continued strengthening in the global economy, which augurs well for external demand for Jamaica's goods and services. Preliminary data for the quarter indicates some positive movement in support of this projection. For the mining and quarrying industry, data for April 2024 indicate that the heavier weighted alumina production increased by 3.7%, while crude bauxite production decreased by 43.7%. Preliminary data on airport arrivals for April 2024 indicate a 4% decline. This largely reflected the Easter holiday being celebrated at the end of March 2024 relative to 2023, when Easter was celebrated in April. However, it is anticipated that stopover arrivals data for the full quarter will yield a positive outturn. The projection for fiscal year 2024-25 is for growth within the range of 1 to 3%. All industries are forecast to record growth as greater focus is placed on entrenching macroeconomic stability to facilitate higher levels of economic activities in this new growth phase. The new growth phase refers to the fact that the country has fully recovered from the shock of COVID-19 and is achieving output levels above the pre-COVID high, that is, above 2019 output levels. Growth is expected to be led by hotels and restaurants, other services, transport, storage and communication, agriculture, forestry and fishing, and the manufacturing industry. Taking a look now at the upside potential to growth, there are upside potential and downside risks to this forecast. The main upside potential to growth include: one, higher than expected external demand for Jamaica's goods and services due to, among other things, a stronger than expected growth in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners. Two, a more robust increase in employment levels, which could lead to higher than expected strengthening of domestic demand, particularly associated with expanded capacities in some sectors, such as business process outsourcing, manufacturing, tourism, and IT-related services. And three, better than expected weather outcomes, leading to increased agricultural output and water production. The downside risks to these projections include: one, increased factory downtime associated with aged production plants, particularly in the mining and quarrying and manufacturing industries. Two, weather-related shocks, particularly associated with its impact on agriculture, forestry and fishing, and electricity and water supply industries. And three, lower than expected external demand for Jamaican goods and services as a result of slower than expected growth in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners. Vision 2030 Jamaica. Jamaica is currently in its 16th fiscal year of the 21-year implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan. Since 2009, the country has been consistently showing over 60% of indicators improving above the baseline year of 2007. This occurred within a context of ongoing crisis management and recovery, first from the global financial crisis and subsequently from the COVID-19 pandemic. The outturn over the period demonstrates improvements in the country's development status and capacity for development. However, it also highlights gaps in the translation of programs to transformative national impact. The consistency and/or sustainability of development gains have been demonstrated in areas such as macroeconomic stability and employment. There have been improvements in systems and institutions for the delivery of public goods and services in key areas, such as justice, governance and public administration, and social protection. There have also been demonstrations of increasing resilience and strengthened capacity for crisis management and building the foundations for growth and competitiveness, which are critical to fostering improved performance across national outcomes. In the next quarterly briefing, the Planning Institute of Jamaica will provide a detailed update on the implementation of Vision 2030 Jamaica, along with the main development results. This will include an update on the status of the MTF 2024 to 2027, as well as the development performance based on national outcome indicators and sectoral drivers of change. In conclusion, the preliminary data presented on economic performance for the January to March 2024 quarter indicate that the economy continued on the growth trajectory spanning 12 consecutive quarters, that is, since April to June 2021. This trend is expected to continue throughout the medium term. Some of the key factors anticipated to continue to support growth in specific industries include: one, increased room and airline seat capacity. Over the past 5 years, Jamaica's hotel room capacity has grown significantly. Similarly, the expansion and improvements at major airports, including the upgrade of the Ian Fleming International Airport, will serve as a fillip to drive growth in the hotels and restaurants, other services, and the transport, storage, and communication industries. Two, the retooling, retrofitting, and pivoting undertaken during the past 2 years, along with continued strengthening of demand, is anticipated to facilitate the continued growth and expansion in the manufacturing industry. And three, ongoing efforts at strengthening climate resilience, as climate hazards have traditionally detracted from the attainment of optimum performances within key industries. This is expected to facilitate greater stability in the agriculture industry through mitigating the impact of weather-related shocks in the main crop-growing regions. These efforts are also being supported by initiatives aimed at facilitating stronger growth, including the strengthening the efficiency of the rollout of capital projects, building the human resource capacity of the labor force to facilitate the seamless implementation of projects in new and emerging areas, and an intensification of efforts aimed at tackling growth inhibitors such as crime. In closing, I want to thank the very dedicated team here at the PIOJ. I encourage all Jamaicans to continue our collaborative effort and to remain disciplined and responsible as we sustain our efforts to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. May God continue to bless Jamaica, land we love. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. The floor is now open for questions, and I already have one. The CARLISO is the highest interest rate environment affecting the construction sector, specifically on the housing start. It is expected that the government 40 billion project spark will contribute significantly to growth. What are your comments on this?
Can you repeat?
Okay, the first,
question.
that it is expected that the government's 40 billion project spark will contribute significantly to growth.
Definitely, yes. With such a massive capital outlay, it will definitely have an impact on growth in the construction industry. So yes, we agree.
Is there another? Gwyneth? The one above? The CARLISO is the highest interest rate environment affecting the construction sector, specifically on the housing starts. This question seems incomplete, but I'm not really understanding what is being asked. But I think it has to do with the interest rate and construction. Can you redirect or re-ask your question so that we can have a better understanding of what is to be answered? Do you have any other, Gwyneth? There is one more. Agriculture was not mentioned, Mr. Stewart, as one area of growth in the list of sectors that you gave. Why? Since its contribution to GDP is huge.
It was mentioned as one of the main drivers, 7.7% increase during the period. And going forward, it will be influencing growth in the short to medium term. So yes, we had identified agriculture as one source.
Okay. Nicole Hansen has her hand up. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the presentation on the economic update. It's really appreciated. I'm an environmental planner from Canada, Toronto, that will be supporting some of the planning work happening within Jamaica, collaboratively, of course. I'm curious to know, as a Jamaican, Canadian Jamaican, what are the housing targets roughly for each parish? How are we looking at housing in areas that are already existing? So infill development, and for a lot of the new development that's coming in, what are some of the targets based off of the growth that various neighborhoods are experiencing? And so I'm just wondering if that could be addressed. And I guess my sub question to that would be, for the development coming in, how is that development being, or some of the amenities or development charges that would be allocated from that development, how is that going back into various existing communities through servicing and infrastructure? Thank you.
Ms. Hansen, unfortunately, that level of detail that would be the type of data that you want is not readily available. That information that would require some specific work, some specific collaboration with the major developers, but it's not something that is readily available. We don't have specific data on housing targets by parish. It's not available.
Okay, thank you. The question has returned. Is the high interest rate environment affecting the construction sector, specifically on the housing starts?
Yes, we know that interest costs would be significant for any mortgage, but to say specifically that it has detracted X% from demand during a period, we cannot provide that information. We don't have that information. But yes, higher prices do impact demand. So we are suspecting that it does have an impact
on new investment.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Bennett? Yes? Somebody from Observer, it's coming into me. Is the person going to speak or are they typing? Oh, one more question, Mr. Stewart, while we wait on that one. Bearing in mind that the US is our main source market for tourism, and recently we have seen a fall off suggested by some data. Is there any concern that we getting less from that market, and are we widening our markets?
To answer the last part of the question, first, I know the authorities are constantly seeking to diversify the tourism market. So yes, efforts are ongoing in diversifying the source market for tourism. The short-term movement in economic performance from one quarter to the other does not necessarily manifest itself in immediate detractions or in the amount of visitors to the country. What we find is that during periods of, of an extended downturn, for example, a recession, you will definitely see the impact manifesting on the arrivals figures. But for short-term fluctuations, it's not so immediate. We continue to monitor the situation, but for any short-term movement, we are not expecting to see any drastic changes in our arrivals performance.
Okay, thank you. You have that question now, Gwyneth. You may go ahead.
Yes, verbalizing what has been typed by Ms. Miles from the Jamaica Observer, it's a double-barrel question.
First one.
With the economy now operating in the new growth phase and having all our macroeconomic variables trending in the right direction, why is it that the country can't seem to move past the 1 to 2% range in economic output? Shall I go ahead with the second question?
Yes.
Okay. Part 2, outside of the dominant hotels and restaurant subsector, what other of the many under the service industry, let me start again. Outside of the dominant hotels and restaurants subsector, what of the many others under the service industry have the strongest potential to make meaningful contributions to economic output?
I'll ask Mr. Morris to first attempt the questions.
Sure. So for us to grow above the 1 to 2%, we have to address productivity gaps in the country. As you know, Hard NTA has provided free training up to level 4. That is expected to improve the capacity of our labor force, which we expect to further drive growth. We have also diversified our economy over time. So approximately 21 new products have been produced over the last 15 years. And as those products or sectors or industry grow, we expect the economy to actually grow further. So our country grow faster by producing more goods and services and more complex goods and services. We have seen that, yes, we have produced more goods and services. However, it has not reached the scale as yet to further drive growth. As it relates to the industry that will drive growth going forward, we have seen significant investment in manufacturing. We have seen that persons have retooled, using more automation, using more technology. We expect that to further drive growth in the future. We see looking at logistics. We are looking on us as well as the knowledge economy as we move up the value chain in terms of moving from call centers, but also producing some data analytics. We also see potential in, for example, our creative industry. So over time, we have been building and it's just, crossing T's, dotting the I's before we see a really push in terms of productivity growth and long run sustainable growth.
And just to add to that, investment in human capital to ensure that in terms of the educational levels that we ensure that you have investment that will have persons gaining the necessary skills in other industries. As Mr. Morris spoke to, industries that will produce products that are more complex, higher in economic complexity will result in increased growth.
Thanks, Mrs. White. Ms. Hanson, your hand is up once more. You may go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much. Those points that were previously raised were very helpful and extremely progressive in terms of the way that the country is going. Just to add to that point, I'm also curious to know, in terms of commercial and manufacturing jobs and land uses being prioritized, is there a type of master plan that each parish is looking at so they understand where manufacturing and commercial activities should occur or should be condensed to or mixed into for existing neighborhoods? While we're looking for the creative class in various knowledge economies, to come into Jamaica and support the economic development of the country, specifically Jamaicans abroad. And there's a lot of us outside of Jamaica that want to come back and participate and build and contribute to the economy based off of our expertise. I'm really curious to know what planning mechanisms are put in place to support commercial and industrial activity, how they're being incentivized, and also how workers can live in their communities. And is that housing or infrastructure something that you're having conversations on, or is there a plan that's going to be in place to support that work?
So in response to that, there are local sustainable development plans that are done by parish. There are, not every parish has them, but there are sustainable development plans for Clarendon, Manchester, St. Catharines, St. Elizabeth, Trelawney. And these plans seek to outline the development plans at the local level. And they have been done in partnership with our international development partners in terms of building them out. So there are plans which are outlined using the local sustainable development plans. It will happen at the parish level.
Thank you. And this is a follow-up from somebody from Observer, Kellery Miles from the Observer. Have we started to use the new tool launched recently by the PIOJ to measure growth, taking an all-encompassing look?
At this stage, no, we have not started to use the tool. We are still in the process of reviewing and fine-tuning data collection, etc. So no, but we intend to give an update at the end of this year as to the findings from the tool.
Okay. I don't think we have any other questions. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Thanks for participating. Today's presentation will be uploaded to our website and social media pages of the PIOJ and Vision 2030 Jamaica. The handles will be displayed on the screen. And join us again in August when we will present on the performance of the April to June 2024 period. Have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you.